this series is a helpful series for new believers because it tells them basically what a new believer or a believer who needs to learn things about the Bible needs to know, and about the basics of Christian doctrine and faith. It's also a very good series for a believer who's been saved for a while to help them lock into their mind exactly where in the Bible things are taught. It's easy for us as Christians to know that something's in the Bible and to be aware of that, but not always to know quite where it is and where it's taught. And an important part of being able to help others grow in Christ, which is what a mature believer should be doing, is being able to show them where in the Bible it says things. Unfortunately, I do not have the lesson printed off, but on the plus side, it saves ink that way. The lesson we're going to be looking at this morning, we're going to be looking at a believer who refused to grow, a believer who refused to become what God wanted him to be. And he went a lot of the way, but he didn't go all the way. We're going to look at a character, he's King Saul is the character we're going to be looking at. And we'll find some very interesting things about him. Turn to where he's introduced, 1 Samuel chapter 9. The Bible says, Now there was a man of Benjamin, whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders upward he was higher than any of the people. And the asses of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And Kish said to his son, Saul his son, Take now one of the servants with thee, and arise and go seek the asses. And he passed through Mount Ephraim, and passed through the land of Shalisha, but they found him not. And they passed through the land of Shalem, and they were not. There they were not. And he passed through the land of the Benjamites, and he found them not. And when he come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant that was with him, Come and let us return, lest my father leave caring for the asses and take thought for us. Here we have kind of an introduction in the Bible of this man named Saul. We're going to look some more things about him. Let's go ahead and pray first. And we'll pray for the Sunday school and ask God to teach us some things in it. Dear God, please be with us here this morning. And let your presence be with us in this Sunday school lesson. Please work in our hearts that we would open them to you and to the things you want us to hear from your word. And please help us to learn, to grow, and to become who we ought to be. Learn by the example of Saul, and not to repeat the things he did wrong, but to learn from the things he did right, and to follow after you with our whole heart. In Jesus' name, amen. Here we have an introduction to Saul, and he's described in fairly significant detail here, both his physical appearance and his character are described here. He's described in verse 2 as being a choice young man and goodly. So he's basically, it goes on to say, he's head and shoulders taller than everybody else. I don't know exactly how tall the average man of Israel would have been at that time, but this guy was well taller than them. In America, I reckon the average male height is about 5'10", I think it is, if I remember the statistics right. It's somewhere in there. So imagine this guy, if he were in our time today, would maybe be about 7 feet tall or something. He'd be quite a fellow, very large, very tall, probably very big and strong. Not only that, he's described as a choice young man and goodly. So he's good looking. He's choice as in there's no one like him. He's very unique and very stand out. He's probably very good looking, very strong. He's described throughout the book of 1 Samuel as getting into all kinds of wars and winning them. So he's really quite a character. There's really no one like this Saul guy in all Israel. Now, he's of the tribe of Benjamin. Probably about 100, probably a little more than 100 years before this, maybe about 200 years before this, somewhere in there. What catastrophe happened to the tribe of Benjamin? Sandy?
They were doing sodomy, and they all went against them, and they almost cremated the whole tribe except for about 600 men, 400 men.
Yeah.
Then they had problems of finding wives for him because they said any tribe that didn't, that they gave their daughters or whatever to them, that they would do something to them.
Yeah, basically most of the tribe of Benjamin gets wiped out at the end of the book of Judges. It doesn't exactly say when that was chronologically. You can probably figure out somehow. I haven't studied into it really, but basically a while before this, much of the tribe of Benjamin got wiped out because of their sin and their rebellion against God and their rebellion against Israel and their refusal to make the people who did wrong get right. Nearly the whole tribe got wiped out. So here we have this man. He's from a small tribe, but this man Kish, his father, is described in the first verse as a mighty man of power. So Saul is a rather distinct individual. He's a mighty individual. The soldiers of Benjamin were described in Judges as being rather mighty individuals. So he's really quite a person who, by all external and character-wise aspects, would be a good king, you would think. It goes on to talk about him, about how it describes about how he searches for his father's donkeys. Somehow his father's donkeys got lost, and so he goes searching really all over the place for them. This kind of tells me that he's a hard worker, and he's someone who honors his father too. He's off really on a kind of a wild goose chase, if you will. And he can't find them anywhere. They wander all over the place. So, really, there's a lot you can learn about him from this. In verse 7, the Bible says, in the previous verse 5, Saul said, "Let's go back to Dad, lest he forgets about worrying about the donkeys, and he starts worrying about us." And his servant says back to him, "Behold, now there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man, and all that he saith cometh surely to pass. Now let us go thither, peradventure he can show us our way that we should go." Then Saul said to his servants, "But, behold, if we go, what shall we bring the man? For the bread is spent in our vessels, and there is not a present to bring to the man of God. What have we?" So Saul, here we see, has a respect to God and to the man of God, and he's not a kind of beggarly individual. He understood basically the idea. It's not quite how I mean to word it. Basically, he wasn't trying to mooch off things, but he understood that you should try to be a blessing to others, and you shouldn't just try to take. So he's not a low-minded individual like that. He's really has quite a respect for God and the man of God. His servant, it seems, had a fourth part of a shekel, we see in the next verse. And so they go to Samuel. And when he comes to Samuel, God had already prepared Samuel. He told Samuel that he had already that he was going to bring him somebody who he was going to anoint to be the king of the people, and he was going to use that person to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Now, if we read the end of the entire account of Samson from the book of Judges, and the account of Samson is chronologically the last part of the book of Judges, though it's not the last chapter. The last chapters of Judges are just basically kind of a overview of what the nation was like at the time, but the account of Samson is chronologically the last event. We'll look at the events during the life of Samson, then look at the events during the life of Eli, and then look at some descriptions about some things during the early reign of Saul. The Philistines basically ruled over Israel, and Israel was basically just a very subservient sub-kingdom of them. Samson, when he was judge, the people gladly delivered him up to the Philistines to get rid of him so the Philistines wouldn't do anything to him. When Eli was judge over Israel, it talks about how the Philistines went to war with them again and defeated them and some other things. Basically, they were very subservient to the Philistines for quite a while. There were times when they had glimmers of freedom, it seems, but not a whole lot. By the time of Saul, we read a few chapters later that the Philistines had taken any kind of instrument of war away from the people, all their swords, all their spears. They even took the files away from the people so they couldn't make their own weapons. And they basically made it so if the people wanted to sharpen their instruments for the cattle and stuff and for plows and things, they needed to come to the Philistines to get them sharpened. So it's kind of some background information about Israel. It's a rather impoverished, subservient, destroyed people with bad internal unity, as we saw from the book of Judges. And we'll see that internal unity spread throughout the entire books of 1st and 2nd Samuel and the books of Kings and Chronicles. Anyway, but to get back to where we were, Saul was going to be made king over this people to deliver God's people from the Philistines in a mighty way. God wanted, basically, it says in verse 15 and 16, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines, for I have looked upon my people, because their cry is come unto me. So God is going to use Saul, and he wants to use him in a mighty way to defeat the Philistines. Saul, when he hears from Samuel that he wants to make him king, this is what Saul says about himself. Am not I a Benjamite, and of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? And my family is the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin. Wherefore then speakest thou so to me? Saul is small in his own sight. He's humble. He is not basically trying to arrogate himself that I should be king because I'm the son of a mighty man and I myself am a mighty man, and all these sort of things. He basically he doesn't think he's worthy to be king. And the truth is Saul's kingship came from himself, and his power to become king didn't come from himself. It came from God. We see about Saul's call to kingship in chapter 10, verse 1, that Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? Now then Samuel goes on to describe a bunch of signs Saul would see, and he would go and do these things, and he'd see these signs, and when he'd see these signs, he would know that it was come to pass. And not only was he called to be king, but he was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied. Verse 6 says, And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and shalt be turned into another man. And let it be that when these things are come upon thee, that thou shalt do as occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. We see very clearly that God chose Saul to be king, and he was going to empower him very strongly to be something beyond anything Saul could be in his own strength or power. In their own strength and power, Israel was basically nearly a slave nation, and were perhaps on their way to extinction if God hadn't done something. Saul then goes on to prophesy. We see in the later verse 10, And when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. We see in chapter 11 a bad situation occurring in Israel. The Ammonites, a great king of the Ammonites named Nahash, who's talked about earlier in 1 Samuel also, this king named Nahash comes against the people. He comes against Jabesh Gilead, which is a city which gets beat up a lot on. He comes against that city, and he surrounds it and tells them, basically, you guys surrender. And they're like, well, okay. And he's like, just so you know that you surrendered, once you surrender, I'm going to come in and poke out all your right eyes, which is a pretty mean thing to do. Unless he just, I guess, maybe wanted to turn it into the city of pirates or something and give everybody an eye patch. Anyway, he's a pretty brutal and cruel king. So they say, well, we'll give you an answer soon. Like I think they said before, by noon the next day. So they send out messengers to Saul. Saul basically, in verse 6 we see in verse 5 basically Saul is in the field with the herd. And Saul says, What aileth the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. In verse 6, we see God comes upon him. The Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard these tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. Saul, through the power of God, would deliver the people. Not through his own power and might, but through the power of God, he would be able to deliver the people of Jabesh and all Israel. When the people of Israel in 1 Samuel, I think chapter 7, were complaining to God and to Samuel that they wanted a king, one of the big reasons they cited was Nahash the Ammonite. We need a king to deliver us from this evil guy. And that evil guy came, and that evil guy was tearing them up. And he took a yoke of oxen and hewed it in pieces and sent them throughout all the coasts of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. So he takes a cow, cuts it in parts, sends it around. If you don't come, your cows are going to get cut up. And he says, come after Saul and after Samuel. This tells me a lot about his character. He is trusting in God for this victory, and he's bringing the man of God along with him, yes.
Did he say God first and then Saul, or Saul first then God?
He says, whoso cometh forth not after Saul and after Samuel is what he said. And himself, being king, would be understood that he'd put himself first.
Okay, I'm just
Samuel,
curious.
Yeah, it's interesting thing to think about. But Samuel was basically at the point where he was abdicating from his judgeship, and he'd stepped down actually in the chapter previous. Or not in the chapter. Next chapter, actually, he completely steps down from being judge. It seems that Saul was kind of timid about being king because he was in the field with a herd. And at the end of this chapter, they actually re-crown him king again for all the people. They crowned him in the previous chapter, but they crowned him king again. So we see him basically, he defeats the people of Nahash. It says in verse 10, So it was so on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host of the morning watch, and slew the Ammonites unto the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. And so we see an interesting aspect of Saul in the final verses of this chapter. And the people said unto Samuel, Who is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death. So the people want to find anybody who is opposed to Saul because they're excited about his reign and they're thrilled about being delivered. They say, we're going to kill anyone who spoke against Saul. And Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. Looking at Saul, we see interestingly a lot of parallels to David. He was, like David, a goodly man. Like David, he was a son of a mighty man. By the time David was young, Jesse was described as an old man. David was the youngest of 7 sons and at least, I think, 2 sisters, or probably more. Joab, who was his nephew, it seems was at least his age or older when you read about the things what go on in 2 Samuel and such. Similarly to David, God filled him and used him mightily to do things he could never have done himself. Like David was throughout his life, Saul in the beginning was small in his own sight, and Saul sought after God. Now, unfortunately, we see Saul does not continue in these ways. Saul was even merciful to those who had opposed his rule. You remember David's mercy to many people when they opposed his rule, both with at the beginning of his reign and during the rebellion under Absalom. David was pretty merciful to people under both occasions. We see, unfortunately, in chapter 13, we begin to see the failure of Saul. We saw at his beginning he was somebody who, by general physical characteristics, would be expected to be king, but really had the sort of moral and spiritual characteristics that you'd really want in a king. Merciful, yet able to act and able to deal out justice and able to defeat the enemies. He was what Israel needed. He was a humble man. He was a hard worker. He was not a beggar. He was a giver. He was apparently a kind individual. He was someone who honored his father. He was very respectful of his father and of the man of God, of those sort of authorities. And a person who's going to be an authority, you want to be a respectful person, not a disrespectful person. A person who cannot understand authority will never be good when he is in authority, will always be still a terror there. Because every authority is ultimately under the authority of God, and interestingly enough, is under other authorities as well. And every sort of king there is, to whatever degree he is, derives his kingship by the consent of those of whom he is king over them. Many kings who thought that they were invincible met their end at the hands of a revolution. So a king, no matter how great he may be, must be a sort of king who is in subjection to those under him and serve them as the people, as the wise men told Rehoboam. They told him, you need to serve this people and not be a tyrant over them. And Rehoboam learned when he decided to be a tyrant what happened. He lost the 10 northern tribes. So Saul had everything it took to be a great king. And physically, those gifts were given to him by God. Spiritually, these things were given to him by God. He had what it took to be a great king. God provided all these things for him. God called him, God empowered him, God set him in the place, God put him there, God used him, and then in chapter 13, we find a bad situation beginning to brew. Basically, in the first 4 verses, it describes Saul was beginning to reign. It says, Saul reigned 1 year when he had reigned 2 years over Israel. Saul chose him 3,000 men. It talks about how he and Jonathan went and smote a garrison of the Philistines. The Philistines got irritated about this. Verse 5, and the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. 30,000 chariots. 30,000 chariots is a lot of chariots. Imagine, if you will, 30,000 sedan cars. They're probably kind of similar size, I would guess. But imagine 30,000 sedan cars. It's quite a sizable area it would take up. Imagine 30,000 chariots coming at your people. It says 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen. I guess they put their horses mostly into their chariots. So they only had 6,000 horsemen, which is still not bad. But then it says, and people as the sand, which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up, and they pitched in Michmash, eastward from Bethaven. Now, from what I've gathered, basically they kind of came to a central point in Israel along a large road, and it kind of branches out to the north and south and east, almost kind of like a crossroad area. They occupied this area, kind of, in effect, to a degree, cutting northern and southern Israel in half, and making a tremendous display of force. Now when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves, and in thickets, and in rocks, and in high places, and in pits. Basically, all of Israel is routing. No one wants to stand their ground against the Philistines. They've got a huge army they got out of somewhere or other, and they come to wipe everything clean. They come to finish the job. They're not going to take any more of this rebellion business. And everyone runs. And some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. So some of them just packed and left their inheritance, crossed the river Jordan, went and hung out with the other tribes on the other side, just completely left. And it says, as for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. So Saul's staying in Gilgal. He's waiting for Samuel, it describes later. Everybody's with him scared. They're shaking. It's about to be really bad times. Whatever size army he has with him, maybe 3,000 men as it said before, maybe he's got more by now, they're in a fix. They don't really have much in the way of weaponry, it says in verse 22 of this chapter. So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan, but with Saul and Jonathan his son was there found. So Saul and Jonathan are the only people who even have swords. Morning, Joel. And so they're in a real fix. You have basically a ragtag, untrained army with bad weapons, probably mostly, basically their farming implements, probably, I would guess, and perhaps some makeshift clubs and whatnot, trying to face a large organized army with chariots, and they probably don't even have horses. They're in a strait, as it says, in a fix. So Saul, it says, and he tarried 7 days, according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. And Saul said, Bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. And it came to pass that as soon as he made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. And Samuel said, What hast thou done? And Saul said, Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash, therefore said I, The Philistines will now come down upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. So here Saul explains the situation. Basically, he was afraid. The Philistines are about to come down and slaughter everybody. He's afraid, and so he, instead of waiting for Samuel to come to offer the offering, what seems to be what they'd set up, and what Samuel had told him, he offers it himself. And I don't think his sin, it doesn't at all seem to indicate, his sin wasn't so much in offering the offering. We see later King David offering offerings on the floor of Araunah the Jebusite. He's not rebuked. We see Solomon offering offerings, and he's not rebuked. His sin is not per se in offering the offering. His sin is his sin of rebellion, of not waiting for Samuel to offer the offering. He was told, You wait till I get there, and he decided he would quit waiting. And that was Saul's sin here. He acted in fear and unbelief. Instead of trusting that the man of God is going to come as promised, and instead of waiting on God to work, Saul decides he's going to work himself. He basically became impatient with God's timing. He decided he was going to solve things himself. Samuel said to Saul, Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue, for the Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. Saul lost the opportunity to be used in a very great way by God to have his family be the family over Israel. He lost this chance. His rebellion affected other people. Our rebellion does affect other people. Interestingly enough, Saul himself is not particularly affected by this judgment in any way which would impact his day-to-day life, if you will. But who is the next generation. Our rebellions do a lot to destroy the next generation. Our refusal to obey God and to do right hurts others often deeply. Well, we go on to see his second rebellion. We'll look at this in chapter 15. We're running out of time. Took a little longer on introductory material than I meant to, but hopefully it was helpful in understanding the situation. Samuel chapter 15. And Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord hath sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, and how he laid wait for him in the way, when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. So he's supposed to go to Amalek. Who remembers what Amalek did to Israel? Charlie.
When Israel was coming up through the wilderness area and route to basically Promised Land, they came from behind and attacked them from behind, which would be whenever they had their troops, they would have the men in front, women and children behind. So they came to basically attack the weaklings, the sick, the elderly, people they could take advantage of. They wouldn't. Basically, their goal was to not let Israel cut through where their territory was, on the border of their territory. They wanted to attack.
The Amalekites, remember the battle where Moses had to have his arms held up?
Oh, yes.
This is kind of in reference to that. And so he's supposed to go and effect the vengeance of God upon them. Interestingly, God gave Amalek some 200-something years to repent of that. God, 200-something years later, let that people continue till their cup of iniquity was full, and they were a wicked people. And so God goes and uses Saul as his way of judging them, Saul and the people of Israel, to judge those people. Saul raises an army, verse 4, verse 5 and 6. He tells some people, the Kenites, to get up out of there because they helped the children of Israel. And verse 7, and Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen and of the fatlings and of the lambs and of all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they utterly destroyed. So Saul kills everybody but spares King Agag. I think his reason for sparing King Agag is kind of similar to something we saw in the book of Judges. There was this one king called Adoni-Bezek, and basically he described how he had like all these kings sitting at his table with their thumbs and toes cut off, and now he was defeated, and he was the one who basically was in subjection. And I think his goal kind of was basically to keep Agag as like this, trophy. Thank you. That's exactly the word I needed. Keep him like as his trophy, like, look what I did. I beat Agag and all his people, and I have Agag here as a destroyed testimony to how great I am. I think that's the situation. Is self-aggrandizement, basically. So that's why he spared him alive. And Saul and the people, all of them, spared alive the good animals, and they destroyed all the bad animals. Anything which wasn't really good, they destroyed. Then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel, saying, It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he has turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. And when Samuel arose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and he's gone up and talks about where he's at. Saul comes to meet him. Verse 13, And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of the Lord. I perform the commandment of the Lord. Saul has gotten into a point in his life where he thinks he's doing right, even though he's doing wrong. When a believer chooses to become rebellious instead of growing in Christ, but becomes rebellious, they can convince themselves that they're perfectly fine and that they are obeying the commandment of the Lord, even when they're disobeying the commandment of the Lord. We'll see Saul's rationale for his behavior below. And Samuel said, What meaneth this bleating of the sheep in mine ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? So Samuel's like, why is there still stuff alive? Why do I hear these animals? And Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, where the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. I like how he says the people brought them and the rest we destroyed. And Samuel said unto Saul, Stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord hath said unto me this night. So God has an opinion on what Saul did there. Saul's like, well, we spared the best for sacrifices. Once upon a time, far before that, two young men, Cain and Abel, had gone before God with their sacrifices. And Abel offered the sacrifice God wanted, a lamb. Cain offered the sacrifice God didn't want, a bunch of fruits and vegetables and such. And Cain's sacrifice was not received. We see here a situation where Saul likewise is offering a sacrifice to God which God did not want. And he says here, in verse 17, Samuel goes on to describe to Saul about God's opinion on this. When thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel? And the Lord anointed thee king over Israel. So when Saul began his kingship, we're in 1 Samuel 15, verse 17. When Saul began, he was small in his own sight, and he was humble, and God was able to use him greatly, because Saul saw that he needed God. Now, when God told him to go destroy the Amalekites utterly, and fight against them to be consumed, as it says in verse 18, Samuel asked this question, Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and did evil in the sight of the Lord? Samuel asked him, Why did you do this evil in the sight of the Lord? Why didn't you obey? And Saul says, Yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and gone the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of the Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. God told them to utterly destroy them, and the people just kind of rationalized it away. Well, instead of destroying these animals here, why don't we take these animals to Gilgal and make a sacrifice of the animals in Gilgal? Either way, they're going to be destroyed. Logically, I mean, makes sense either way. But that's not what God said. And that's what we need to understand, is obedience is doing what God said God's way, not doing things our own way. And Saul had in him a rebellious heart which wanted to serve God his way, not God's way. And when this is why Christians will often stumble and refuse to grow, as they want to serve God their own way and not God's way. God tells them to do something, they'll do it, well, I want to do it my way, not your way. It's interesting, people often, they'll do all kinds of interesting things in the church. One of them is, if you're wondering why at this church we don't really do designated offerings, there's a church I've been to previously where the church has a lot of money set aside in designated offerings, but it can't really be used by the church because it's designated to weird stuff. Like people give, there's like a lot of money towards something really arcane, like cleaning supplies. And, you know, cleaning supplies are all well and fine, but like $7,000 to cleaning supplies is a little above and beyond. And I've heard of worse horror stories, like someone giving like, you know, a lot of money to the church to buy a certain color of carpet. So the church either has to buy said color of carpet by the laws or give the money back, you know, when it's designated. And basically what they're trying to do is serve God their own way, kind of trying to control the church through their giving. People do stuff like that. Or they'll go to the church, and instead of trying to serve through the ministry of the church, they try to use the church to further their own little ministry. And people have actually even done that here. There was a time when a lady came in and started trying to get all kinds of people in the church's numbers. This was about a year ago, and she was trying to harvest people into some weird little Bible study she was starting. Pastor, and I only mentioned this, Pastor Price already mentioned it from the pulpit after it happened and warned y'all, if you remember, it was more than a year ago. Basically, she was trying to infiltrate the church, and she thought she was God's servant doing these great things for God. What she was trying to do is use the church for her own means and methods, not God's way. She wanted to have her sacrifice for God her way. And I'm not saying all this to criticize her, but the long and short of it is, when we seek to use the church for our way instead of God's way, that's the same sort of sin Saul is committing here. This is what Samuel tells him. Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. So, basically, God's opinion is he wants us to do what he tells us to do. Not to do all kinds of great things which aren't what he tells us to do. Sometimes, and I found this to be so even in myself and many other people, when God wants us to do something, and we don't want to do it, we'll do everything but that, and we'll do even great things except what we're supposed to be doing, and God is not pleased by that. When God gives a specific commandment for us to do, He wants us to do that one thing, and not everything and anything and all the other things in the world, but that one thing. The Bible says rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. And we are about out of time in our Sunday school lesson, so I'll hold further thoughts on this verse here. But God has a very serious opinion about rebellion, and it's very, very destructive. In Saul's life, we don't have time to look at it all, but in Saul's life, this rebellion against God would go on to cause great disaster. In his heart, he became angry. He became very bitter. This anger and bitterness against God for removing him the kingship produced jealousy against David for letting David be king. Instead of, God told him, I'm removing you from being king. At this point, he should have stepped down and said, well, God, you put a king in then. I'm stepping down and I'll serve him and do whatever he says. I will not be king anymore. Should have been what he should have done. But instead, he decided to further rebel against God. The Spirit of the Lord went from him. It goes on to talk about, and then God sent an evil spirit to him to afflict him. And it doesn't mean he was possessed by that evil spirit. It just meant that the Lord sent it to him to afflict him. He became depressed. He became very paranoid. Everybody was out to get him. And if you're thinking that everybody's out to get you, look and see what's really going on. I've known a number of people. I've come across them, and everyone is out to get them. Everyone in the church is out to get them. Everyone where they go is out to get them. You kind of look into things, and the result is usually, well, pretty much always, there is a root of bitterness and this anger against people somewhere back. He's paranoid, he's depressed, he's mentally unstable, he's full of hatred and jealousy. There comes a point where twice when David is playing the harp, he throws a javelin at him, and David dodges and he misses, and David survives. There even comes a point once where he throws a javelin at his son Jonathan for supporting David. He's full of anger, full of fury, full of wrath, and it's because he's rebellious against God. This gets so bad that he ends up murdering an entire city of priests through the hand of Doeg the Edomite. Who'd have gone and thought that young man was goodly to look to and was full of all this respect for God, and the man of God would go and murder a whole city of priests out of jealousy over David? That's what happens when we become, when we let that root of bitterness, that rebellion against God, grow up in us, as we do things we never thought we would have done. Refusing to obey has far-reaching consequences on the sinner. Also has far-reaching consequences on those around him. Towards the end of his reign, Saul, his final major act of rebellion, which God promises a judgment for, is he goes to the witch of Endor. And he goes there to that witch and asks her to raise up Samuel. And the reason why is it says God wasn't listening to him and wasn't answering him. And the reason why that is God had already told him what to do, and he'd already rebelled against all that. Had he wanted the hand of God, it had been very easy. He knew just where to find God and just what God wanted. If he really wanted to get things right with God, it was simple as anything, and he could have gotten things right with God. We see his very final days, a great army of the Philistines assembled to attack Israel. He goes to Mount Gilboa, which is kind of a low-lying ridge in northern central Israel, and he's there waiting. The army of the Philistines come, they do battle. Saul and his sons are in the battle. His sons Jonathan and I think 3 others are killed in battle. And it says in 1 Chronicles, gives a kind of a commentary on this. So Saul died for his transgression which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire of it. And he inquired not of the Lord, therefore he slew him, and he turned the kingdom unto David, the son of Jesse. What if Saul, instead of going after that wicked woman with a familiar spirit, would have got right with God and said, basically, I'm going to let David be king. God, give us this victory, and we're going to give the kingdom over David. I suspect Saul and all his sons would have survived. The Philistines would have been crushed at Gilboa. Israel would have been spared a brutal 7-year civil war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And the scars which eventually caused the separation of Israel and Judah would not have been so severe. Saul's rebellion had a great price, and our rebellion has a great price too. It causes a lost testimony. It causes us to be a bad example to others. Saul's a good example of a bad example. Come on in and be seated. I'm just talking too long. Saul damaged his kingdom. And even today, a lot of people like to say, I don't think Saul was really saved. And they cite all these reasons why Saul wasn't really a believer. And the reason why people have a hard time telling if Saul was a believer is because Saul didn't act like a believer should act. And if you decide to live in rebellion, you as a believer will not have spiritual victory, and you'll be a terrible testimony of what a believer is supposed to be. And oftentimes, what can happen in a believer's life is they'll obey just enough not to be in disaster, but will not obey completely. And what happens when this happens, and I've seen this happen, what usually happens is instead of themselves being destroyed, they end up losing the next generation. Don't let either be you. Don't destroy your life through rebellion, and don't destroy your kids and the people around you's lives through rebellion. Submit to God and to what He wants, and consider Saul and his example. We'll go ahead and be dismissed. Dear God, please work in our hearts and help us to have hearts willing to hear You and not hard hearts against You. In Jesus' name, amen. The morning service will start in a little over 10 minutes.